As authors, we often don't know all that goes on behind the scenes of a publisher's publicity and marketing departments. Today, we're going to talk to two people who will spill the beans. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. This is Kristin Donnelly, and today I'm here with Kate Leahy. Hey, Kate.
Hey, Kristin.
Today's discussion is super fun.
And informative.
Last year, as we've talked about many times, the book Turtle Island came out. We worked with this dream team at Clarkson Potter for publicity and marketing. And I've worked, with other publicists and marketing folks, and they're wonderful. But this just all felt very next level.
What was it about it that felt next level for you?
I'm sure part of it is budget, right? Where we just got a little more attention because Sean has a bigger profile. But I also think part of it is just the passion that these two guests have for their jobs. So the guests are Brianne Sperber and Felix Cruz. Brianne is the Associate Director of Marketing for Clarkson Potter and 10 Speed Press. She's been with Penguin Random House since 2018. She was also a marketing director at Rodale. And early in her career, she spent some time at The Strand, which is really cool because that was another thing with Brianne where I just felt like she was such a champion of independent bookstores. And then with Felix, he's a publicist at 10 Speed and Clarkson Potter. He's been there for the past 6 years, starting as an assistant and moving his way up. He just has so much passion for his job and just really, really good people person, which I feel like that's what you need for a publicist, right?
Absolutely.
Felix does all things publicity and Brianne does all things marketing. And we will talk about those differences because understanding that can be a little bit confusing. But yeah, they just had this passion and they were just always on top of it all. And they had great ideas. I see the importance of does your publicity team really understand your book?
Absolutely.
Do they get it? Or are they going to try to shove your book into this cookie cutter marketing plan that won't move the needle? So let's go hear from them. Felix and Brianne, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
Hi, happy to be here.
We are so excited for this chat.
I think one of the more confusing things for cookbook authors is hearing when they get into this publicity and marketing phase of their cookbook, what is the difference between publicity and marketing? How does that make your jobs different?
I think this is the hardest question even for us to answer. It feels like it's constantly evolving. So on the marketing side, which I handle, it tends to be more of your digital presence and brand platform, your brand extension, thinking about audience development. So when you're working specifically on marketing for a cookbook, we're talking about how do we use your social media in a smart way? What partnerships do you have? What influencers or big mouths are in your community? And how do you elevate the book in that realm? Sometimes it also is easy to think about marketing is a little bit more sales oriented insofar as marketing is typically the person who's going to keep you up to date on where your distribution is, right? So how many other retailers are carrying your book? Is it going to be carried in small shops? Maybe Barnes & Noble has a request for you to do an Instagram Live. Those requests will tend to come through the marketing lens. And at the same time, if you're otherwise a business leader, the marketing person is going to be the person who's going to help you figure out how to sell your cookbook to your consumers. So for instance, if you're Fly by Jing and you own that brand and you've decided to sell your cookbook, we'll help you figure out how to sell the book not only to your retail channels, so your D2C, your cash register, but also to traditional retail like Amazon and brick and mortar shops.
And when you're saying D2C, you're talking about direct to consumer?
Yeah, direct to consumer. So if, for instance, you have your own website, you sell stuff through it, your marketing person is going to help you figure out when do you start selling, right? Because you don't want to sell during pre-sale because that actually can hurt your distribution. And I can go on about that later. But I think marketing tends to focus more on expansion within your brand and activating and leveraging your brand and your platform in the best way possible.
That makes sense.
Yeah, on the publicity side, I feel like it's a bit more clean cut and traditional, but no less artistic. The media, national, digital, local, print, radio, podcasts, and then events, which are in full swing. So We had a dip during the pandemic when we switched to virtual, but now everyone's really excited to tour and get out there, and I will get in on that and my my learnings about tours this season,
Yes.
and like how we can leverage and work smarter, not harder, and maximize an author's presence in key markets.
And to clarify, you both work exclusively on cookbooks, or is there some lifestyle or other nonfiction involved?
Between Brianne and I, we were like, it's also art and photography on the 10 Sweden Parted list. Lifestyle, relationships, some art things. I've done graphic novels as well.
I do a lot of pop culture. I end up kind of being the person who works on every kind of random genre or like subset of an interest. So I've done everything from a book on Formula One to the like first major how to play chess book that's like been published in the last like 40 years. I think it was the first one. I, work with a number of celebrities on sort of their photography books. My background is in wellness, so I tend to also do a number of our prescriptive titles. 10 Speed is actively growing its advice prescriptive list in the one color category. So it's all just, traditional reading books, like traditional format. So I expect to be doing more of that.
We have you here because I had this really wonderful experience working with both of you on the cookbook Turtle Island. We were both curious, like in-house, how do you get assigned to work on a title? I think I assume you both worked primarily on cookbooks, but it sounds like there's a little bit of mixing and matching. So like internally, is there a very obvious Felix title and Brianne title, or are people fighting in the background for different things, or what's going on?
It's a little bit of both. I think It's like we, at this stage, Brianne and I and everyone on the Potter Intensive list tends to specialize and kind of own a section of the list. Like, oh, this is a lifestyle book, like an interior home decor book that'll go to someone who's like this, expert in that. And for me, it's definitely cookbooks and even more specifically like diverse foodways, diverse authors of very like specific backgrounds, which is when Turtle Island came on the list. I was like, oh, that is a me book. And frequently, there are a lot of books that are very much everyone is like, oh, that's a Felix and Brianne book, which also tends to be diverse foodways and working with our debut authors and authors who are coming from diverse backgrounds and publishing for the first time. That is definitely a Felix and Brianne go-to song.
It's pretty diplomatic. Like we do put in our requests. I will say that a number of the pop culture books I've worked on have been like, we're giving it to Brianne because no one else requested it. And like, I always kind of laugh about it because then they also largely end up being some of my most successful books, which I find like hilarious. For me, when we get our fall preview, so like, as you guys know, there's a launch. So we have fall launch the year before that season and like summer launch the year before that season, yada, yada. So we have about a year to figure out who's going to actually be working on what and what the plans will be and come up with everything. And so I gravitate more towards books where there either is a storytelling component where the book is more than just a cookbook. As much as I love a number of our content creators and influencer quote unquote books, like that's just not the work I want to do because I can't figure out if there's any meat in there. And so a book like Turtle Island is something that I'd want to work on because I can think about audience in a really strategic, different way without feeling pigeonholed. It's big, it's expansive. This is a book that has opportunities in the academic market. It's an opportunity, like there's opportunities in the library market. It's not only going to be big within the Indigenous community, but there's like a bold statement towards food and food movements and even sustainability. So when we get projects like that, where there's just sort of a bigger narrative attached to it, I get really excited. I love working on books that just give me something else to think about because it's not just food. And I think, something that Sean has said so many times in all of his interviews is exactly how I feel about why I like to work at 10 Speed and Clarkson Potter. We just get these really special projects where food is political and food gets to be more than just like what you serve on your table. And it gives my work purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the Brianne and Felix books, that combo it's a very hardworking cookbook, and it usually fills a very specific gap in the market or in terms of representation from a specific region or cuisine, like the Salvisol cookbook, which was the first, traditionally published Salvadoran cookbook in the US ever. And then on the Potter list, Brianne and I worked on Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghosts by Crystal Wilkinson, and that is a story that was very much in need of telling in terms of Black Appalachia cooking, and the presence of Black foodways in the Appalachian foothills since the early 1800s and beyond. Turtle Island. It's filling in several gaps in terms of culture, anthropology, research, and also voice. I mean, I think all those authors like have a very specific voice and trajectory that they have pieced together. And part of the Cookbook project is kind of that articulation in both definitions, I guess, in the sense of like connecting, but also like giving voice to.
One of the things that, Brianne, you touched on earlier was the timeline. I'd love for both of you to talk about timeline because authors, I feel like it's very squishy for us. We don't really know when, but it sounds like, Brianne, you're saying that there are very important parts of time management that go into a launch of a book. And Felix, you're going to have a core list of people that you're going to reach. When does it all start and what should authors know about this?
The first part of that question really for me is I think an author needs to start thinking about brand platform, connections and influencers, audience, and outreach the day they submit their proposal to their agent. You want to know well ahead of time who's going to be the person who's my big mouth, who's going to be my speaking partner on tour, what brands are going to elevate my book. Am I going to include brands in my book? Are brands going to sponsor not only my recipe testing and all the ingredients I need, but are they going to sponsor me on the road if I go on book tour? So like I challenge authors to think about it less in terms of I've sold my book, now what, to I want to sell my book. What's going to make my book sell? That's number one. Like, I don't think it starts with a cover reveal. I think it starts the day your agent signs you up and you finalize your proposal. On the sales side of things, every house does it differently, but I think most are on the same schedule where like, you do the season announce about a year ahead of time. In those seasonal announcement meetings, we call them launch. Our sales team sees everything from sample spreads. Sometimes those sample spreads include actual photography from the book. Sometimes it's just like a look and feel for what the book will actually look like. Spreads are like the 2-page layout. Sometimes sales is given the opportunity to weigh in on a cover direction. So like our sales force, which is, hundreds of people that do everything from selling the book to Amazon, Walmart, to every single tiny cutesy gift shop across the West Coast to, even like things as narrow as comic book shops. We invite sales to say like what they think will work.
I hate to interrupt, but just one quick question on the sales reps. Are they in-house or are they freelance sales reps that work across the country for Penguin Random House?
They're in-house, salaried. There are a number of like smaller cookbook shops and like gift book stores or like gifty sort of shoppy shops, as we call them, that work with other distributors that are not Penguin Random House employees. That's like such a specific subset of sales. And to get into it is like extremely confusing. But I know, in the same way that like some libraries order their books from a distributor like Baker and Taylor or Ingram, as opposed to us directly, there are a number of shops that do that. So I would say most of the sales force is internal, but there are going to be opportunities where like if you go to like the cute little candle shop down the road that also sells what have you, they might be ordering from a distributor and not a Penguin Random House rep.
I see.
So it's like very nuanced. Even at this time of year where, we're recording this in December, it's peak holiday season. There are a number of independent bookstores that largely work with us, but will use other distributors because distributors might be able to ship the books faster or the books might be in their warehouse. It's like, sometimes it's just like a matter of like, I'm fulfilling my order with Ingram. I'm going to throw in a PRH book there because I feel like it. Like, it just depends on how the shop works. So just to circle back, so for the way the timeline works for an author, for instance, like I think every cookbook takes anywhere from 2 to 3 years between, you've written the book, you've edited it, design has come through, photography, your photo shoot, blah, blah, blah. When we have the launch, that's about a year from pub. Within a matter of months, you probably do your cover announcement. We tend to start working with authors around 6 to 8 months ahead of on sale. Depending on the author, sometimes we started earlier. We started earlier largely if it's an author with like a huge platform where we need to figure out like, okay, you're otherwise going to be working with a ton of brand partners. Like, how do we make sure the cookbook has its moment at the exact right time? Or like you're a business leader and you know that you're going to be doing a bunch of speaking engagements, talking to you sooner to figure out how to get support from those different engagements is something we need to like organize earlier. And sometimes it's just like a cookbook where, we buy it as a mid-list opportunity. We don't need as much lead time. We don't need to give the author as much lead time because they don't have the same platform that they have to really engage. And so for the cover reveal, I think that kicks out the consumer facing promotion. So that's like the first time really that the audience is able to pre-order. I think there's something to be said for being an author who gently releases some information ahead of time. So I think it can be really sweet to tell your audience, like, I sold my book, to post your publisher's marketplace announcement. I don't see why anyone would be discouraged from posting things from their photo shoot, for instance. Like, it's a really special moment. And if you're really engaged with your audience, like, you should be making them your cheerleaders, like, and get them excited early, because then they're waiting for that announcement as opposed to like being fully surprised.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
But for the rest of the timeline, yeah, I think it starts with a cover announcement. Cover announcement is like anywhere from like 6 to 8 months ahead of time for us, at least. Like, I think I've seen some publishers seem to do it about a year early. I'd be curious why. We don't necessarily find that like every single consumer is like primed and ready to drop, their credit card down at that exact moment that early. But, to each their own. Like, plenty of people have successful campaigns, so I can't say that the strategy's wrong.
Yeah. And from a publicity point of view, when do you get started, Felix?
They're different, yeah. I mean, I think when Brianne and I and every marketer and publicist on our team, usually, at least for me, speaking for myself, 6 months will kick off, right when we want to start doing the cover announcement. That's like traditionally bread and butter when we begin our work on M&P. Then I always say, because marketing usually kicks off, and there's a lot of technical specifics, like requests, assets that need to be made, that Brianne will give. It's a lot. And then I come in the end and I'm like, and you won't hear from me for another 4 to 6 weeks. I kind of like loop into the background, and then I think publicity work starts in earnest 4 months out from a book. And it's really been truncated since the pandemic. We used to use terms like long lead and short lead to delineate, like, okay, we need to work with print and TV 6 months out, 8 months out, to get on the calendars. And then the pandemic happened, and then as we've seen all the convulsions in the media world and print media specifically over the last 5 years, like that space has dwindled. However, the digital and the podcast space has increased, and that does, we work with those folks 2 months out, and then increasingly since the pandemic. And as many of the authors listening, forthcoming authors, if you take anything away from my side on publicity, is like, there's a lot of anxiety because it's like we're 6 weeks out from launch, and it's like, where is my media? Where's the media, honey? And I'm like, where is the media? That's a good question. But things come together, especially for things that are going to be featured in the New York Times or even on CBS. We get, like, oh, can your author be here in New York in 2 weeks? It's really moment to moment. It's fast and it's furious, and it happens very razor thin sharp to publication date and well beyond. We're getting media and fielding media requests for authors for specific, like, heritage, months, or just opportune moments to highlight a specific cuisine or a region well after publication. So we're looking at the long game on publicity, but definitely 4 months, and then in that 6 week stretch to publication, and of course tour. Things happen on publication day, and usually those first 2 weeks after publication, especially if we're targeting the New York Times list.
I'll just brag on your behalf, I guess. But I remember with Sean, like, his big thing was like, I really want the Daily Show. And probably for many months, it's like, how's the Daily Show coming, huh? How's the Daily Show? And then it literally was like, we have the Daily Show. You have to be in New York next week on this date after you're like, it was very quick.
Yeah. Tell me about like how that happened.
Yeah. I mean, fellow publicists out there will stand in solidarity with me on this. Like, we pitch till we're blue in the face and get that solid yes or no, and everyone that's pub pitches, traditional media knows that, like, they're like, you're not going to get a no sometimes, and you're really just going back and going back. And, with Sean was making the roundup. Sean had like 3-star reviews and like all the trades. And I was going back with all of that info. And I always knew for Sean that, just Sean being the great subversive and punk and like different in terms of like the flipping the narratives on its head, I always wanted like a Thanksgiving segment, just like to like really since Sean's written pieces for Eater and Time Magazine and NPR every Thanksgiving about reclaiming Thanksgiving and the spirit of Thanksgiving and what it really means in terms of foundation, stories for our country. And so I pitched that with all of the glowing reviews and lists and blurbs that we were getting. And then I got an email back, and then they were like, yeah, let's do Thanksgiving. Let's find some dates. And then I was like, oh my God. Yeah. And that's what, I think She's now a deputy publisher at 10 Speed, but she used to be the marketing director for Potter and 10 Speed, Wendy Dornstein. Like, shout out to her. She always said that marketing can be a science and publicity can be an art, in the sense that publicity is very addictive. You're kind of chasing the high of the yes. And it's a lot of no's. Whereas I think on Brianne's side, on the marketing side, it's like very like X to Y, input, output, you know? And for me, it's like, I don't know what's going on the other side of the computer. I can make calls. I can meet people for lunches and kind of triangulate what the answer may or may not be. So, and that goes back to like the original question of timing. One of the things that I find really useful, if I have a little bit more flexibility in terms of when I actually start my publicity work 4 months out, at the top of a book campaign, and I always ask this in our kickoff calls of authors, I'm always asking, and this was true for Sean, like, what are your hopes and dreams in terms of media and placement? Like, what's that one thing that I know that I can really try and prioritize for you so that I can make best use of my time and your time so that you feel successful? And that's what we're always talking about in terms of marketing publicity campaigns. The definition of success is different from author to author, season to season. Some folks, of course, think the New York Times bestseller list is that. Some folks think that being in every indie in a specific region is that. Some people think touring at their indie, where they grew up and wrote the manuscript in, is like a part of the definition of success, and it changes. And so I always like to ask my authors, like, what's that? And so for Sean, it was The Daily Show, and then that was always on the top of my list. And we finally said yes. I was like, wow, that's great. Dream to go and like fit that in on the day. They had one night, and it was also like the shutdown, the government shutdown, the traffic controller crisis. That was when our tour was starting. I'm very grateful that this year's over, because the stress of watching airport like departures and arrivals and being like, is he there? And like just being on text with his assistant Joe. And,
oh my gosh.
But he made it. And anyone that's seen the segment knows how beautifully it turned out, and just how much of a compelling storyteller with such like grace and elevation Sean is, and talking about what, you know, folks can really be doing on that day and all days for Indigenous sovereignty. So it was great.
Yeah. Congratulations on just nailing that down.
No kidding.
Very impressed.
Shout out to Turtle Island, since Kristin is here too, and Brianne and I worked on that book. It's just like that book literally this morning made the LA Times. Like, it's been on every single best cookbook list. Diverse foodways is kind of the category, and very frequently a book that will do very well with the indies. And this book, Turtle Island, like all the indies, like Brianne was constantly sending, you and Kristin and like Sean and the team, just like those reports from the field of just like how the booksellers were getting really excited in very specific markets that are on the smaller side.
Tell us about those. What do you do with those internally? Does it have any impact on publicity or marketing? Is there something where all those little great messages go?
I have to say, I had to bully sales about this book in different ways, not necessarily in the same way that we've had to for books that just like don't sell at indies. Like sometimes like major platform, major celebrity books just like don't get carried at an indie. But like this was one of those books where I was like, I feel like very early I said, hey, I want to do a huge signed book plate campaign. I think that this is going to be an indie darling. I think that every indie in America is going to sell it in a big way. I think it's going to be hand sold. And I got some pushback, and they were like, well, 2,000 book plates seems like too many and this and that. And I was just like, I disagree, but like, okay. And initially the requests, came in lower than that. So like sales wasn't entirely wrong. Like really, I could have cut it by like 50%. They have a home, they have a place. But the other day our sales director was like, hey, I need more book plates. And I was like, I sent them back to Sean. Like you all told me no. And I told you I needed them. So anyway, it's great because now Sean can like go live his life instead of like signing every single copy of his book. And I know they will serve a great purpose and help, with all of his amazing outreach at natives. But it's just funny to me because sales said, we historically like reserve this kind of thing for like Pulitzer Prize winners, like the James, by Percival Everett, like focusing more on the literary. And I was like, I think you guys don't understand that this is a book that could maybe win the Pulitzer. Like this is a book that is more of a reading book than it is really a book. I mean, like something that like I joke about repeatedly is like Sean himself says there are recipes in this book that you're never going to make because you're never going to be able to get the ingredients. Like, yes, it's a cookbook. Most of this is like accessible for home cooks. But like when you think about that, and when we get books like this, where it's like, okay, there's a serious reading element, there's a history. This is a book that's going to move from your bedside table to your coffee table to your kitchen table to your kitchen counter, covered in whatever oils, but also like, snuggled up in bed with you. Like it takes it to a different place. And so when we get these bookseller requests, so I mentioned like cover reveal and that timing. So the cover reveals tend to happen around this thing that we call Catalog Go Live. And Catalog Go Live is when our sales team has pulled together all of our fall catalogs, or seasonal catalogs rather, to sell out to their accounts. So they present it, and they present, the entire list, and they highlight which books make sense for them for that specific account. We're so fortunate that our team is really hands-on. So New York City has their own rep, and this person will go to bookstores directly. She'll do her presentation in person. There are a number of reps that are just phone reps, but more often than not, people are doing these full presentations in person, going through title by title, like why it makes sense for your bookstore, why it makes sense for Barnes & Noble, why it makes sense for whatever. With the quotes that I've been sharing for Turtle Island, because this isn't a traditional reading book and you really need the physical book to get a reaction, most of the quotes have been coming later.
Can you just tell listeners what would be said in one of these quotes?
A lot of people are kind of surprised by the runaway success. And so sometimes it's like, we got something from a bookseller in Vermont saying, this book has taken off. I can't keep it in stock. I can't keep it on shelves. The number one surprise hit of this season has been, XYZ. Or this one bookseller, I think he was in Missouri or Mississippi, and he said something to the effect of like, I've been telling everybody who will listen that the next big movement in food is going to be indigenous cooking, and it's here. Mm-hmm. And it gave me chills. It's giving me chills to remember him saying it. Largely, the reports are like, this is in our holiday catalog. People are coming and asking for it. And it's been everything from, a cookbook specialized bookstore to, my local indie here in Los Angeles, Skylight Books, is doing incredibly well with it too. And like to see the range in neighborhoods and markets and locations, like, LA couldn't be any more different than Woodstock, Vermont. It couldn't be any more different than the Midwest. And it's just really beautiful to see that like it's happening. And it happens for some book every season. Like there's always some book that ends up being the indie darling, like literary favorite. And this was just one of them. But yeah, the bookseller reviews are interesting because I think they hold way more weight for a novel or like debut nonfiction or a memoir. So for instance, like someone like Patti Smith, Bread of Angels came out. They probably would have done an early bookseller campaign where they sent out galleys or early manuscripts and gotten bookseller reviews. I remember when I worked at the Strand bookstore, I wrote a number of reviews for books. And also like it was wild because they used one of my quotes in some of the graphics for Station 11.
No way.
Yeah. I mean, that was also a special book for me because my first job, I worked for Emily's agent. And so I knew the book. And so like when it came through and like our buyer at Strand was like, hey, there's this like debut book coming. Knopf is asking for bookseller reads. Like I lunged at it because I knew Emily personally. And it is just a beautiful book. But what's interesting too is like we get the bookseller quotes usually so late that it's not even like Felix can really activate on them for tour. So they don't impact our tour decisions really for a debut book or for a book like Sean's where it's like our first book with him.
Mm-hmm. It feels more like a momentum thing almost.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off what Brianne was going to say on the publicity side, and then we can talk about tours, like a lot of the books that Brianne and I work on, we really have to advocate and educate the stakeholders that we work with. For Brianne, it'll be, sales and these booksellers and letting people know why they should prioritize this book and really giving them, like spoon feeding them the content and platform and or culturally what's happening. And we always knew that Sean's book was going to do that. It is the most comprehensive work to date about North American indigenous foodways, like as much a work of anthropology and archaeology and journalism as it is like food and what it means in this moment. And with media, and it's been a great season. The Daily Show hit was like, it happened. And then I got so many requests from folks in the media that I had been pitching since May, April.
Oh my God.
You predicted that.
Things in publicity that I love to do when a journalist comes back and is like, hey, been seeing this hit in the lists out in the world, would love to schedule an interview. And then I'll like respond with my pitch from like 6 months ago. And I'll be like, hey, just picking it up here where we left off. Let's talk. Media gets media. That's how it works. But it's kind of like a building the plane, chicken and egg situation, right? And frequently, Brianne and I are in that intersection of like, we trust our gut. We have enough experience behind us to know when and how and where it's going to kind of happen, but we don't really know how it's going to hit, but it's like chasing lightning in that sense.
What's really interesting about this is I think from authors, we're on the outside and we always think of the publisher as like, it's like us and then it's the publisher. And we always think of the publisher as one united group of people. But what I'm getting at is that there's so many layers within the publisher that,
Brianne's face is like, no.
It's wild.
Yeah.
So because like we just don't know the nuance, right? We're on the outside.
It can be definitely top bottom, but it is a confederacy in the sense that there are allegiances and there are just different areas of expertise, and folks can say that we're just kind of all siloed or tunnel visioned into a specific subset, but I think a lot of where Brianne and I have done a lot of our great work together in partnership is that we are very much in the cookbook food world, and we do know the players and the stakeholders that move the needle on both of our sides. But Brianne and I are very voracious readers, and we're huge. Gossip isn't the right word.
Chisme. I don't know.
Yes. First draft of history as it's happening in real time, like. We know where to go to find right information and where to disseminate information to who at the right time. And we're both really good at that. And I think...
Wait, Felix.
Brianne's face is amazing right now.
What are you talking about?
What I'm saying is that we collect a lot of good information that's happening like culturally. And
I was going to say you're culture watchers. You are.
Yeah, culture vultures in a lot of way. And we share that information with each other. And we create this spider web of people, ideas, places, venues, podcast conversations. Brianne was in LA just like having a lunch meetup with another cookbook co-author, and I'm here in Berkeley and I'm like about to go to Popoca and like see Anthony Salguero, who's, Salvadoran restaurant, just had an amazing New York Times review by Teja Rao. It's like Brianne and I are like, we're doing that. We're eating out, we're going out, we're talking, we're swapping ideas, we're talking to past authors, future authors, forthcoming authors, and it's all kind of just like putting it in that crank wheel and then coming out for a season and being like, okay, so this is kind of maybe where we should put this book in that constellation of ideas. That's what I was trying to mean.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
To kind of, Kate, respond to we think of publisher as like the publisher, like publishing isn't a monolith. And there are so many times where we have to be like, there are X number of thousands of Salvadoran people in this specific region. And what do you mean there's no distribution here? Or like, they'll say to us, like, why are you sending this author to Houston? And it's like, well, did you know that like the biggest diaspora of Salvadoran humans ends up being Florida, or like Salvadoran citizens, or this or that? I don't want people to take away that it is a fight, but I definitely think like you have so many decisions to make when you decide who your cookbook publisher is going to be and also who your agent is going to be. The best agent and the best publisher is the publisher that understands that your book has 2 or 3 very specific audiences and isn't going to try to push you into other places. And the single best thing that you can do is be very clear with your editor, publisher, and your marketing and publicity team, like what that is. And so like with Sean, with Turtle Island, like there wasn't a question of what this book was. Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghost, a little bit of a question only insofar as the book is primarily memoir with recipes. And so because Crystal was a writer, she was like, she worked with us in that direction, but there were definitely moments where we had to be like, no, sales, don't ignore this. She's the former poet laureate of Kentucky. She sells tons of poetry collections. This book needs to be in every single indie. She wanted to go on tour, and our publishing team was like, do we need to send her on tour? And it's like, this lady sells out bookstores all the time. Like, why aren't we sending her on tour? I think there is still so much nuance that can happen, but you have to keep in mind, like when you're working at a place like Penguin Random House or Simon & Schuster or HarperCollins, you're in a huge company. And so it takes people either on your marketing and publicity team, your editor, or your agent a little bit more to get those things surfaced. And so if you feel like your direct contacts aren't actually getting you any kind of support, or you're like, this doesn't feel very creative, like that's on you to have the conversation with someone. But it's also on you to figure out like, what is your ask actually? Because you've got like, it's you up against 20, however many different authors being published that season, that week, that month. And so who's your audience? Why would we send you on tour if your audience isn't there? Like, just because you want to go to Seattle, like Seattle might not be a market for you. Seattle's a perfect market for a book like Turtle Island because there's a huge indigenous community. There's like 7 tribes right outside of the Seattle airport. Or the Houston example I gave, we've got a couple Puerto Rican cookbooks, and we talked about like there's a huge diaspora not only in the Bronx, but it's also here. And do we send you to Miami? Like, where do we go to find your people? And that's not to say that we think about books just in terms of like I don't think that a book by Tony Tipton Martin about Black mixologists is just for Black people. But I do think sometimes it's helpful to tailor some pieces of the campaign for that audience.
That makes sense.
In terms of in-house, advocacy and education, and just like helping to work with our folks internally to get the resources and messaging that we want. On the author side, I think part of marketing publicity, and Kristin has seen this from Turtle Island, it's just like you want to be co-conspirators and collaborators, and an author should come with ideas and preferences and priorities of what they want to see on marketing publicity so that we can really work smart and use as much of our time and resources. And that's the big asset that we have on marketing and publicity is, sometimes it's not just the marketing dollars, it's the time. We know something that an author wants way in advance, months in advance, years in advance even, then we can work towards that goal without stressing out at the last minute because it was just being surfaced before launch, right? So the more lead time that you give marketer and publicist, and the more co-conspiratorial you can be, collaborative, and being okay with like not taking every rejection so personally, which is hard to do, but it is important that there is always going to be another opportunity down the horizon, and kind of just working with us to kind of see where else we can keep plugging and chugging, because it's a very, very crowded market, especially if your book is publishing at the end of the year.
I just wanted to ask about things that authors can do. And one of the things I was thinking about was lists of contacts of everyone they know who could possibly help. But my question on top of that is it often better for authors to reach out to those contacts instead of the in-house publicity or marketing? Does that move the needle more?
I'll let Felix talk about the media, but I think for certain opportunities, authors don't realize how much leverage they actually have. For instance, like this is such a specific example, but I worked with this author duo on a deck, an inspirational deck. I think it was just called the Sobriety Deck. One of the authors is a non-alcoholic spirits entrepreneur. She has a brand. The other is a former lawyer who also speaks regularly on panels or goes to conferences that highlight not only women in law, but sober women in law, sobriety in law, and like all these other AA programs that aren't necessarily, obviously AA is anonymous, but I asked her, I was like, if you're doing all these opportunities and you're getting paid an honorarium, would you be willing to consider having them purchase some copies of your deck to give out? And she was like, oh my gosh, yes, in a second. And so don't just assume that because I don't know someone at NPR, I can't help my campaign. If you're on an HOA and someone on the HOA is randomly connected to, I don't know, Google, Meta, LinkedIn, it doesn't matter. Any major corporation, do you know what corporations have money to spend on? Books, holiday gifts. One of our biggest customers every year is JP Morgan Chase. We do have a team that pitches to them because they buy a book every year for all their employees.
Wow.
That is something that let's say you or your husband, wife, child, second cousin, maybe they could be the person who pitches your book.
Yeah.
It's not just media, and what is splashy doesn't always sell.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because it's also going back to with your proposal and who you know and putting that all in there. So it's my cousin is the person who makes the decision on which speakers come in at Google, and I could go and give a little chat about whatever.
Google will buy tons of books for their talks.
Yeah.
It's really amazing. But also there are tons of ERGs, there are tons of DEI initiatives. Even at PRH, we've got one for Arab Americans. We've got one for Jewish Americans. We've got women. We've got LGBTQ folks, you name it. And we have an ERG for it. So I just think if you are a person who is otherwise involved in the community, you probably have more connections than you realize who are going to help buy your book in a big way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, very often, especially in the food world, everyone who's been a photographer, food stylist, co-author, collaborator, has, been at Cherry Bomb Jubilee. It's a small world, especially, on the coasts. So I always encourage my authors, yeah, it doesn't hurt. I think everywhere in this conversation so far, I think we've been touching on that word of mouth is still very much a very singular, powerful force for moving the needle in terms of making a contact and making a connection and making a collaboration stand out for someone based on that personal or professional partnership or history that you have. And, I'm working on Revel on the 10 speed list by Mariana Velázquez. She's the author of Colombiana that comes out March 17th.
And she was on the podcast a couple of years ago. We can link to that in the show notes.
Yes, absolutely. I literally just met with her before I came out here west for the holidays. And I was like, let's talk about exactly this. Are there some folks in the media that we can actually make sure that we're both tapping on both sides? And I always encourage my authors, yeah, sure, go ahead and send that email or text in a casual, friendly way, like, oh, my book's coming out, my publicist will be in touch, and then I can come in on the back end with like the press release, the press kit, and come in with all those great accolades as the campaign really gets going, and it feels natural and not weird. So, it's, again, it really adds, again, to that conspiratorial kind of vibe that we're doing, because it's a campaign, and sometimes it's war and sometimes it's love. A little bit of both.
Yeah. Are there anything where you're like, this happened and then we saw this huge jump in sales? Does something like The Daily Show, do you see like a spike in sales?
Yeah, I mean, on the media side, for sure. Like, the big players are still doing big things. A GMA hit, one single GMA hit will do a lot for sales as opposed to doing 5 stops on a tour. That's something on the media side that I really tried to educate my authors with. And we did it with Turtle Island too. We were like, do we need to be in New York on this day? And I was like, we don't need to be in New York on this day. I think we have a good New York event. And then bada bang, we got The Daily Show, and that did a lot for our sales. And then that halo effect, because it's such a watched show, created so much local media interest, and lots of folks have been like, can you be on the podcast? Can you feature him? Can you send me a recipe? That's the big get, and it doesn't happen all the time, but it's still, seeing a New York Times feature or an NPR, All Things Considered, being on Morning Joe, for example, like on MSNBC, like those things still matter. National media is still very important. And then I think that does move the needle. And I think to go back to the collaborator piece, it's really great if the author can work with a publicist and marketer to identify those storylines within the cookbook that are just not cookbook stuff. Maybe there's a very specific regional tradition in the head note for a specific recipe that not many folks know. And then I'd be like, great, well, I can start with the local NPR from that region, and then we can work our way grassroots to go up. And sometimes it goes up and down. And
that's cool.
Sometimes it's middle out. Like, it just depends on where we're at in terms of our connections and where I feel like the biggest leverage is going to be. Sometimes if it is like with The Daily Show, it's like, well, this is a national conversation that's happening, and I think that would really get. But sometimes with like Crystal, it was like there was not a local radio throughout Appalachia in the South that had not requested an interview with Crystal Wilkinson.
Yeah, the hometown hero thing. I talk about that a lot sometimes for authors. And influencer mailings and content.
I was going to say, media isn't appropriate for every author. So you just kind of like have to think about, like, again, who's your audience? Is GMA going to be appropriate for this person versus that person? Like, that's something that like we talk about with the author pretty regularly, where it's like Daily Show for Sean was like a slam dunk, but would Daily Show make sense for this very run-of-the-mill content creator or this cookbook that doesn't have as much of a political statement behind it? Like, maybe not. When I think about what's going to move the needle for an author, it's really just like, have you defined your audience and have you solidified your messaging? Because in terms of like content moments and like elements of the campaign that we see as needle movers, the initial book announcement usually moves a significant amount. If that initial book announcement doesn't resonate, then we have to pivot quickly and figure out like why. We've seen more and more that one post isn't enough. We kind of need like 2 or 3, and we need to like have like an announcement week as opposed to an announcement day, because the algorithm just doesn't favor that kind of promotion. We're also seeing like algorithms are just shifting so much that like you can't really rely on 1 or 2 good posts. Like, you really have to have consistent messaging that is like low level sort of salesy. So for instance, posting a recipe reel once a week over the course of 12 weeks might mean more than posting one day here, one day there. It's like consistency, knowing that it's part of a series. I watched a panel with Rachel Carton, who does this great social media Substack called Link in Bio. And she was saying that people really want episodic content. They want to feel like they're watching something. You know, you've probably noticed that a lot of influencers do things in themes. And I think themes are really smart. What's going to move the needle isn't like one splashy giveaway or one really great brand collab with a huge brand that has a massive $5,000 prize that you can win. What's going to move the needle is like you've like had a consistent storytelling the whole time. I also think that like it's okay to be cringy and like to talk about your mom and do really cute things, like lean into the storytelling. Like, some of the best content I've seen recently has been people being like, I'm showing my best friend my first copy of the book, and then everybody cries, and then you sell a whole bunch of books and you're like, yeah,
if they cry, they buy. That moves the needle.
Literally. I had the most touching experience of my entire publishing career was I got to give Justine Doiron her first copy of Justine Cooks. Aww. And she like cried in front of me, and she even apologized and was like, I'm sorry, I'm gonna like ugly cry. And then like later texted me and she was like, I didn't cry as hard, I think, as you were there. And I was like, I mean, it was fine. Like, we still sold a lot of books, but like you should have cried. Like, you should have stopped, because we maybe would have sold more books. But the other thing that like really moves the needle is not only consistency, it's figuring out ahead of time. So again, like, do you do this in your proposal or do you do it before you finished your cookbook? I don't know. You decide. But like, where is your storytelling going to happen? Don't just like spend all your time on TikTok because someone told you to. Spend it because your content there works. Don't start a YouTube series or a YouTube channel because someone told you to. Do it because you're going to put out really bomb content that's going to just deliver. Creating like an ecosystem of consistency in posting. Like, when are you going to post? So like Justine's campaign to me is like a campaign that I'm really proud of working with her on, because she said, you know, this is my plan. And I was like, no notes. She was like, we're going to do my Substack every Saturday. That Substack post is going to direct people to YouTube, where it'll be a recipe reel for the next like 12 weeks. And I was like, done. Great. Groovy. And then she had like content throughout the week on Instagram or TikTok that either was a clip from the YouTube or, you know, a different recipe reel in its own way. But she created an ecosystem so people knew where to find her and what to find her for. And she seamlessly created a promotion engine where the book was featured at every stop.
Nice. So smart. People have to find you, you know, for them to want to be fans of you, to want to buy your book. And they have to maybe see your book like 4, 5, 6 times before they actually do want to own it.
It used to be 3 times, right? And for years it was like, you have to see the same message 3 times before you buy. And now I think it's closer to 5 or 6, and if not more.
Yeah, I've heard 7 even. Yeah.
I think that moving the needle as an author, collaborator, help your publicist find the stories within the book and really identify it for them and where those different stories can get placed. And having a wide range of stories will give us a better chance of placement than just the one singular story. From a media perspective, for content and consistency, like really help your marketer and publicist identify and bring out and elevate the wide range stories. If you think of your cookbook as a stained glass window, bring out each of the little pieces and help get the light through, you know?
Yeah.
This has come up more specifically with some of our lifestyle authors. Like, there are some people who get caught up in the like, more is more. I want to do a whole bunch of podcasts, and they get fixated on like quantity. And I just don't think that that is a good strategy for you because of your bandwidth. Like, as an author, you're going to be fatigued. Why do it? And so if 1 or 2 podcasts with bigger reach come your way, say no to the small things. Unless your publicist is like, this is the exact right market, like don't turn it down. But also, like, if your publicist isn't telling you, like, I have 20 podcasts for you, don't automatically assume that's a bad thing. They might also be really strategic and thoughtful about what they're having you do. You know, we have some authors who are like, what am I supposed to be doing right now? I'm not promoting my book. And I'm like, well, your book's not coming out for 6 months. Like, yes, you did the cover reveal. Like, if it comes up naturally, you could say on Instagram stories, I'm making the meatballs from this chapter in my book, and here's a link for you to order it. But like, don't feel like you're not doing anything, because again, like, there's some fatigue, and we just don't want to exhaust you or the people. There's nothing worse than when an author comes to me and they're like, I've been talking about my book for 3 months and I'm bored. And I'm like,
everyone else is too. We don't want to hear it anymore, right?
Like,
don't do that.
Okay, so like, how can we change the storytelling? How can we change it so that it's not just this? Like, if you're not having fun doing this, like, why are you writing a cookbook? Like, why are you on social media? Like, you should have fun. And so like, half your content, honestly, can be like archive stuff. Some of the best content we made for Sean was like our trailer using a lot of the behind the scenes images, getting content from some of the collaborators who just wrote these like really beautiful moments that like we couldn't capture in the head notes. Yeah, the book has a lot of content, but like, you know what else? Like, you wrote the damn thing. You're going to get spreads and early pages. Like, take photos of everything. And like, It really should be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that.
I know. I feel like we say that all the time.
Yeah. Like, what's your why?
Yeah.
Have fun. And if you're not, don't sell a cookbook, because it is so much work.
It's a lot of work.
100%.
Yeah. If you hate making content, maybe don't sell a book. If you hate doing interviews, like maybe don't. Or just be a co-author.
I was going to say, be a collaborator like me.
Yeah.
Chase what's fun.
Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Oh my God, what a treat.
So great. Thank you.
I can't wait to tell my mom.
Likewise.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more about each episode, subscribe to our newsletter at everythingcookbooks.substack.com. Here are some other ways to support the show. Go to everythingcookbooks.com and check out our totes, t-shirts, sweatshirts, and other merch, or buy us a round of coffee. You can also leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Thanks as always to our editor, Abby Sarcatella. Until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.